In today's episode of our photography review show, we're gonna review landscape, mixed themed, and wildlife photographers. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our photography review show. I hope you had a great week, and I hope you're ready for more photography reviews. Now, if you've never been here before, my name is Jakub, and I'm a professional photographer based in West Sussex, England. For the last 6 or 7 months, I've been reviewing your photos, and I reviewed over hundreds of photographers and thousands of their images. If you would like to join us for the next photography review show, all you need to do is to join our membership, Clever Photographer Plus. You can find out more about it on our website. However, for a little fee, you will get a monthly theme bundles full of overlays, textures, presets, brushes, and everything you can imagine for photography fun. So once again, make sure that you head to our website, cleverphotographer.com, search for the membership there, and join us for the next episode of the photography review show. And here we are once again in Lightroom CC, where we're gonna be reviewing your images. We have 9 photographers and their pictures to review, so let's start right away. The first series of photographers are landscape photographers, so let's start with Gary. Gary, one image from you this week, so let's have a look at the technical data. Sadly, there is no information about how you capture the image, which is a little bit of a shame. It's always good to have it. So I can give you a little bit more tips and tricks on how to do stuff maybe differently or what to improve. But still, let's have a look at it and let's see just by looking at it with our eyes. And here we are in Lightroom CC, where we're gonna be reviewing your photos. We have 9 photographers to go through, so let's start right away. The first group of photographers are landscape photographers, and the very first one is Gary. Gary, let's have a look at your image. Let's bring it into the edit module and see if we have any information about the camera. And sadly we don't, that's a shame. It's always good to share the information about how you capture the image, so I can give you some tips and tricks on what you could maybe improve or fix. But still, let's have a look at it with our eyes. Let's zoom in to 100% and see. I mean, looking at it as a JPEG, obviously there's a texture and sharpness, which is good. There is a lots of texture in the sky as well. One thing, I think the sky is really textured and really refined, so that's something we can have a look at in the editing. Other than that, I think it's quite nice, like a big depth, details all the way. The light, I mean, we're getting some really strong shadows in these areas, but other than that, I think it works quite nice. There is quite decent glow around the sun, which is worked very nicely too. So all in all, technically, I think it's quite well handled. Just shame that we can't see the data. When we zoom in, there's lots of bending here, as you can see, different artifacts. So you can't really even say if there is a noise or not, but looking at it like this, all good. Which brings us to second part of the review, that's the composition. And looking at it from the composition part, there is lots of stuff which I really like, and there is some stuff which I think you could improve for the next time. The first one is the foreground element. So obviously, to make the composition as strong as possible, in epic scenes like this, we would be looking for foreground, midground, and background. And generally, you would like the foreground to be quite significant, where in this case, it's just this a little bit here, and I just wish it was something a little bit bigger, that maybe we have a little bit more to base the whole scene on and to get a clean flow through. So that would be something I would be looking for. Other than that, what I really like is how you place the sky on the top third. I think that works really well. 2, I think some of the trees and the stones help us with the scale. The depth also is very visible here, so that also works very, very well. So it's just a little thing about the foreground. Other than that, the composition is very lovely. Moving forward on editing. Now, obviously this is your artistic representation, so it's completely up to you. First thing I would be looking at is to maybe double check the white balance. I think this turquoise color or the aqua it looks good until it's just a little bit overdone, and in this case I think it's really visible for me. So I would maybe look into go into color and the color mixture, and in hue, seeing if I can maybe lower it just a little bit more back towards the general blue, maybe something like this. And then I would go into saturation and actually bring the blue down a little bit, not aqua, but the blue, just something maybe like this. Let's see, before and after, just to make it a little bit more natural. The next thing, we can of course double check the white balance and see what it's gonna do for us. And I think a little bit of warmth would go a long way. I wouldn't necessarily go on our tint to greens, I would leave it, but I think a little bit of warmth, just make it a little bit more cheerful and positive. Next thing I would do is I would look at the sky. Now, obviously there's lots of textures, lots of details, lots of stones, rocks, trees. And with all of that being really busy, then you get a sky which is also super busy. So what I would do is I would go into my masking, click on select sky, which then goes ahead and actually select the sky for us on your image. And then what I would do, I would go into the clarity and just really minus it to make it really nice and dreamy. Fluffy, dreamy, just to bring a little bit of a contrast between your ground and between your sky. So that's one thing I would do. I think a little bit of extra exposure just to brighten it also would help. We can also open the shadows a little bit. We're just trying to make it less contrasty, less dramatic, so we get a nice balance. When it comes to white balance, do we need to make it a little bit bluer or a little bit warmer? Maybe a little bit warmer with a touch of tint. So that's what I would do there. And finally, I would add another mask, and this time I would use the radial gradient and actually position it over the sun, and then add the warmth on it, definitely exposure, and then minus the clarity. So we get a nice glow. I would place it somewhere around here, maybe make it a little bit bigger, and just do something like this. So now when we're done with it, let's have a look at the before and after. So this is something I would do with it. Then you could jump in with the brushes, maybe do some dodge and burn and see what would work the best. However, I think after this, it's quite epic image. Anyway, the scene is great. I see what you're doing here. I think it works very well. The sky works as well for us when it's a little bit done. The sun is really nice. So altogether, good job, well done. Thank you so much for sharing the image with us. And if you have more images, make sure you send them to us next week. Moving to John Lister. John, 2 images this week, and I love this one. Lenorchy, it's really, really nice. Lovely, clear main subject, main element. Really, really lovely. And this epic scene with a lovely reflection. So let's jump to it. Let's see if we have any camera details. And we're gonna start by looking at this one. Let's just see. Same camera, same lens? Yes. So Nikon Z6 with your Nikkor Z24-70 lens. And from your camera setting on this one, ISO 125, 24 millimeters, f9, 1/200 of a second. So as a camera setting goes, I think you're spot on. Keeping the ISO nice and low is one way to do it. 24 millimeter for me is about as far as I would go with a wide lens on this type of landscape. I think anything wider is just starting to look too small. f9 works very well. Again, making sure that you're getting the best out of your lens, which generally is between 7.1 and 11 on your f-stop. 1/200 of a second, making sure that we have a nice texture in the sky, as well as the reflection in the water. So all in all, technically, very well done. Moving to this one, same lens, same camera, ISO 100, so spot on, 28.5 millimeters, still nice and wide. f8, brilliant, making sure everything is sharp, and 1/125th of a second on the shutter speed. So, John, well done on this one as well. Nothing I can add. Lots of lovely details, lovely colors, lovely light as well. No noise, nice texture visible in the sky. All in all, well done. Talking about post-processing on this one, I really, really like this picture actually. And not post-processing, we're talking about composition. Talking about composition, I really like it because it really is an example of a clear focal point and a clear message you're trying to show. Obviously, some kind of atmosphere and letting us kind of showing us the place, understanding and bringing a little bit of the culture in. I think it works very, very well. And the only thing I would just do here, I would jump into the edit, then go to our geometry, and in the geometry, I would go on to auto. So that way we get it all nice and straight. And that's about it. I don't even mind that the tree is cut off here because that's really not a part of it. This tree is all in together with the red, giving us a really nice contrast. Well done. Now on this one, even though I love the landscape, I think this is where I would follow my kind of vision of if there is a part of the image which doesn't give anything extra to the composition, I would crop it away. So in this case, this is what I would do. There is lots of this white space which isn't really that interesting and doesn't really need to be there. And then there is a little bit of the beach which also doesn't really give us anything extra. So I would jump into the crop. And what are you on? 1609? 1609, great. I would definitely bring it more in. Now, obviously, you need to know what parts of the image are more interesting for you. Also, another thing, when I use a reflection, that's probably the only time when I try to have the middle point of the reflection right in the middle of the picture. So normally I go 1/3 of the sky, 2/3 of the ground. But for the reflection, I like to kind of have it in the middle because it creates a really nice balance in the scene. So once I'm done with it, I would maybe even zoom in a little bit further to something like this. Once I'm done with it, I just hit enter and then I get something like this, which I think has a little bit more impact. More things are happening on the image where with before, let's have a look. There's lots of these kind of spaces which doesn't really add anything to the image. So what can we do? Let's have a look if we can undo. Yep, this is what I would do with it. So this is where I would take it when it comes to composition. Otherwise, great. Details all the way, which is brilliant. Lovely details in the sky. Lovely reflection in the water, which works very well. All in all, excellent image. John, thank you very much. And let's move on editing. Editing on this one. What could we do here? I think it's actually really nice. I love the natural edit. I think that works very, very well. You can do different things. You could do a little bit of dodge and burn here. Another thing with the reflection is to jump into your brush, maybe increase the exposure a little bit, make it a little smaller. And sometimes it's nice just to kind of paint around the darker edges on your reflection and make it very subtle, but it actually creates a really nice contrast and it works very nicely. Of course, that we could go in with something like linear gradient and close the image from the bottom a little bit if we would want to. So we would do something like this, and similarly something from the top and get something like this, and that would be it. Otherwise, brilliant. Now with this one, there's really nothing much I would change or do differently. You could do, you could jump into your effects and maybe add a little extra vignette. Oh no, you don't want to do it too much. Then you could go into the masking and maybe use radial gradient and just bring some exposure on your main element to just make it a little bit brighter. And that's about it. John, love the images. Both of them works really nicely together. It's a lovely little series, lovely capture, great technique, great post-processing. Very, very good. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. If you have more, make sure you send them for next week's episode. Which brings us to John Wilson. John, what do we have here? 3 images from similar location as far as I remember. Looking at it, we have all these trees. And does it tell us information about the camera? Oh, it doesn't. That's a shame. Groove Hill, John. Where is the Groove Hill? You need to share that with me in the comments. Starting with this one. Okay, so what we know. Let's zoom in 100%. The texture is there. It's a little bit soft, but I think, again, that's with the transition into JPEG, so I'm not that worried about it. The framing is quite nice, but we can look at it in a composition. The texture in the sky is there. Few things we're going to go through when we do the whole review, but very decent picture. Lovely scene as well. Really epic scene. Now on this one, square goes a long way, so I'm always happy with that. Lovely, lovely details in the sky. Interesting color. It's artistically, all 3 images are artistically very interesting. What I really like on it is that you have a certain style. So even though I would do things a little bit differently, when you go through them, you can easily recognize they are Siri and they are from you. And I think that makes a big difference. So coming back to this, I like the lines. I think that works very well. The details are there again. There's a little bit of noise, but nothing crazy. Also a little haze, but technically otherwise very well done. And on this one, it's like an orchard or something like that, or like a little garden. It's a shame that the thing is tilting. I have tried to straighten it earlier, but I didn't have any luck, so I would just leave it. There is a lovely details in the sky. There is a lovely details on the trees. Interesting colors again, and just interesting image. I really like how it's kind of going that way. Very, very good. Which brings us to the composition. I think other than the fact that it's tilting, and I just wish it would be more in line, which I know it's not always possible. I really like it because you have your main subject, your foreground, your focal point, and then the thing is just going into the, further into the softness. I think it works very well. The light is nice. It's interesting colors, and it's definitely an image that makes you think when you look at it. So all in all, John, very, very good. On composition on this one, what would I do? First of all, I would tilt it a little bit, just do something like this. And then the middle row, I would place it in the middle. If you're playing around with the leading lines and stuff, I think it's good to think about the center point and really play around with that, as I think it makes it a little bit stronger. Other than that, as I say, the leading lines work very well. The depth is lovely here. We get a little bit of sense of size and scale, so that works very well too. So all in all, John, very good. And finally on composition on this one, this is where I would jump in, see if we are on 16 or 9, if you're going for the really kind of cinematic view, and I would crop out some of the sky. There is not really that much happening in the sky, so I don't think it all needs to be there. And once you do this, it just makes it all much more kind of powerful. We get a really strong and lovely foreground. We have a very good middle ground and lovely background. And together, when they are in these trees, I think it's a little bit stronger, and I think it works a little bit better. That brings us to post-processing. So one thing I would do, I would brighten this part a little bit. Now, if we go to light and try to do it with opening shadows, it opens the foreground as well. So we're gonna do it with a little brush and open the shadows. I maybe overdo it, but then we can adjust it. And we will just paint on these areas. It's no problem that they are darker, it's just that they are at the point when they are black. And you always want to have a little bit of details in, just for the viewer to be able to say the difference a little bit. So I think something like this. Let's see the before and after. And another thing we could do is create another brush and just with a little bit of exposure. And we're just going to use that for really the darkest parts. Maybe I overdone it there. Yeah. And something like this. Yes. So let's see before and after. I think that just makes it a little bit more interesting. If we would wanna, we could jump in and maybe dehaze this part a little bit, but that's completely up to you. Again, very much your artistic decision. The white balance is what it is. You went for it, so I will leave it the way you have it, as that's always up to you. And that's about it on this one. On this one, what we could do, I think a little gradient or little vignette would make it a little bit stronger. Anytime I use a square and this kind of leading line, I also like to use mask and linear gradient and just point it from the bottom and minus the exposure. So it kind of has like a slow start from the bottom. So the views, the eyes actually go through the image. And I think that always works very well. If you want, you can also add one from the top. And that way we kind of close the image and focus really on the center of the picture. Which brings us to this photo, and to be honest, I wouldn't really change anything here. I think it works very, very well. You have your bright main subject here. Everything else is leading quite nicely. So all in all, John, well done. Great 3 pictures. Epic capture, really clever composition here, and lovely, lovely scene. So all in all, John, thank you very much for sharing your images with us. It was a pleasure to review them. You take care, stay safe, and send us more in the future. Which brings us to Markus. Markus, it's been a long time since I've seen pictures from you. I hope you're staying safe in whatever you're doing. However, 2 great images. So this one with a lovely landscape, with a great foreground and a lovely dramatic sky. And this one with absolutely incredible long exposure here. I was looking at the image earlier. It was 300 seconds long. My goodness, what a great job, especially keeping everything nice and sharp in a contrast. So brilliant image. Let's jump to it. Let's start with this one and looking at the camera details. This one was a Nikon Z9 with a Nikkor Z24-70. Somebody used that lens a little earlier. From the settings, ISO 64, 70 millimeters, f8, 1/13 of a second. So from the camera settings, spot on, nice and low ISO, 70 millimeters, so nice kind of punch in really. f8, making sure everything is sharp all the way through, which definitely is the case, including the sky. So very, very cool. 1/13 of a second, making sure that everything is well exposed, including the sky. So good job, well done on this one. Moving to this one, as I was saying earlier, ISO 64, 24 millimeters, now f8 and 300 seconds. Brilliant, brilliant job. Love the sky, love the contrast. The front look is almost like your infrared look, which I think is really, really lovely, and I think it works very, very well. The contrast of the sky with the black house makes a really nice focal point. Just excellent capture, great framing, and great job. Markus, that brings us to composition, which I think is really good. Of course, you could play around with it and see if you could maybe crop it a little bit more to something like 16:9 and place the house on your third. So maybe to get something like this and really get 2/3 of a sky, 1/3 of a land, really focusing on the sky. But really, those are just kind of artistic suggestions. You could also see if you could maybe straighten the house just a little bit so it doesn't tilt that much. But yeah, those are more tips than anything. I don't think there is anything wrong with the image. Which brings us to this one. And as a composition goes, I really like it. The flow, the leading lines, the foreground element here, the background, the sky, the depth, the scale, which is up by the little tractor and the different trees. Just really, really good. Lots of things happening here. If I would have to pick one thing to give you a tip, I would have hoped that there would have been a little bit more sky on the image. Now I understand there is a big distance between the sky, the middle ground, and then the tractor, but I would just have hoped for a tiny little bit more there. Other than that, it's brilliant. Which brings us to post-processing. Now on this one, I think we need a little bit of help with the white balance because we're getting the green even into the sky. And we can always just jump into the color and try to use the auto, which fixes the sky for us. Let's see before. You can see how you get a green in the sky as well. And it kind of makes the rest of the picture a little bit more realistic. I think when you see it before, when you look at the image for too long, you kind of stop seeing it, which is completely normal. Your eyes get used to it and it looks all good. But I like to use the auto just to give me a starting point, because what I would then do, I would maybe look at this part and seeing, well, there's too much blue. So I would actually bring the dial back. But with the tint, I think the pink definitely fixes some of the green tint we're getting in all parts of the image, which is completely normal when there is so much of green or blue. Then the camera starts to push it in the other parts of the image, and this is a quick way to fix it. So this is about as much as I would do to it. I think otherwise it's great. If you would really want to be fancy, you could maybe make the sky just a little bit fluffier. So you could do that with the quick select sky, and then simply just minus the clarity just to make it less kind of defined and create nice contrast between the really textured trees and a little bit smoother sky. The black and white, Markus, I can't do nothing. I love the image. It's brilliant. It works very well for me. I think it's a great job. Great job already just for being able to capture the 300-second exposure. So well done. Excellent. It was a great pleasure to see your images again. If you have more, make sure you send them over to us. But otherwise, stay safe and take care. Which brings us to the last landscape photographer of the week, and that's Patrick. Patrick, first of all, this image, I was thrilled. I love it. I think it's brilliant, brilliant composition, great reflection here. I mean, talking about foreground element, this is a foreground element at its best. I think it works super, super well. The rest of the scene is great as well. The lamppost being with the glow, which I loved, and the sky with lovely texture and pink in it. The whole scene, the leading lines, just so good. Patrick, well done. I love this image. Probably one of the best images I've seen for a while now. So very, very well done. Let's just quickly have a look at the camera settings here. Sony 7 Mark IV with the 16 to 35 millimeters lens. ISO 100, spot on, 16 millimeter, really wide, making the foreground element a little bit more dominant, which I think in this case actually helps. f8, making sure everything is nice and sharp all the way through the scene. And then 1/20th of a second, making sure that everything is well exposed. maybe even HDR, I'm not sure. It just works for me, so well done. Talking about composition on this one. Now, personally, it's a little bit too blue for me, but not composition, technically. Technically, I think it's a little bit too blue for me, but let's quickly look at your camera. As again, Sony 7 Mark IV, 24 to 70 millimeters on your lens, and ISO 100, 49 millimeters, f8, 3 second. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the star trail in a lamppost, but that's because most of the time they kind of a little bit damage it because they become overwhelming. But in your case, actually, it works really, really well. It's well handled, they are well defined, and it works well. So well done on that. I also like the details on a church. That works nice. The only thing is the blue, really. It's the blue. Of course, with the long exposure, you get a little bit of movement in the tree. That's not a big deal. But other than that, very, very good. Composition-wise, lovely. It's almost like two stories happening at the same time. You have the church here, all it's on, which I'm always impressed by how the camera is able to capture all of this at the same time as all of these details here. I mean, if that's not impressive, I don't know. And then you have the bridge with a kind of flow through. You have a lovely shadow of the lamppost here as well. Just very, very good. I'm very impressed with this picture. So, composition-wise, here, nothing I can add. The foreground is brilliant, the flow is brilliant, the depth is brilliant, the scale is brilliant. Just very good. If I would have to be really picky and pick on one thing, I would have wished for this to be all in a frame, just without the crop at the bottom, but that would be just too much. Post-processing, nothing I can add. Brilliant, very happy with it. Now on this one, what I would do, I would try to minimize the blue sometimes, so it's not as overwhelming. And there's multiple different ways, as you know, how you can do this. I would probably use the color mixer for it. Let's see if we can bring down the saturation a little bit to something like this, and then jump into the hue and see if we can bring the saturation to something when it's maybe a little bit more natural. Maybe something like this. Again, going into actual saturation and another luminance. Saturation, bringing it down to, we don't want to do it too much, like this. And then in the luminance, let's make it a little bit darker. So something like this. Let's see. Before, really blue, unnaturally blue, and then this a little bit more natural for me. If anything, we could go into the white balance and make it warmer, maybe add a touch of tint, and that's about it. So Patrick, brilliant two pictures, should be really proud of. This one, as I say, one of my favorite recently, definitely. This one's still lovely. As I say, the composition is really well thought. The technique is well handled. It's just the blue. And if not the blue, I just wished you would have some kind of texture in the sky to make it a little bit more interesting. All in all, Patrick, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to review your images. And I can't wait to see more of them, hopefully soon. Okay, so now it's time to move into the mixed team photographers, starting with Evgeniy. Evgeniy had 2 flower images this week. So let's jump straight into it, starting with going into the information and looking at both of them, same camera, the Pentax K100D, and looking at both of them. So starting with the technical part, ISO 200, 260 millimeters, f11, 1/180th of a second. So lovely capture. Settings are spot on. The one thing, and I think that's your focus point, or maybe it's to do with the whole idea and putting the picture together, is the fact that I'm going through the image and I'm actually having a little bit of difficulty to find out what's in focus. Now I know probably this one is full on, then this one is a little bit blurry, this one is a lot blurry, this one is a little bit blurry, this one is kind of like in focus, this is partly or not, this one is out of focus, this one is a little bit in focus. So I think either you need to have a higher f-stop to see if maybe you could get all of them in focus, and then that way you're focusing on the plants, on the flowers, and then you have your background. Or additionally, what I would do, I would then focus and actually take these out of the frame and maybe just focus on 1 or 2 to make it a little bit more easier for the human eye to understand them. So that would be something I would do with the framing and with the focus, and something I would try. Otherwise, I think it's very lovely. I love the contrast with the background. The depth, I think, works very well here. The contrast works very well here. And when you get something in focus, it's really in focus. Also, I really like the light. I think the diffuse light works very well on this image. So all in all, very good. Moving to this image now. This is what I'm talking about. So you have your one lovely picture. Obviously, this is the part which is in focus, which I think works very well. The blur at the back is really strong, but it works nicely together. The color contrast, the depth is really, really good here. The one thing I would, again, kind of work on, and that's something what we went through a few times, is the light. And it's the harsh light, which kind of makes it really busy for the scene. And even if you would get like a big sheet of paper, which you could kind of point over the flowers, I think it would make a big difference. So just something to think of for the future. Sometimes when I take a picture during the day, I even try to look for pictures which are in a shadow. So it's not that you can't photograph flowers during the day. It's just you need to find some which have an even light. So that would be my suggestion for that. Also, you're getting this kind of slight blur, which either is from the movement of the flower, or I'm not exactly sure what it's about. However, it's something what I would be looking at. Composition wise, I think picture is lovely. Lovely contrast, lovely softness blur, lovely contrast of the colors as well. The depth works very well. It's very simple and it works very, very well. Where on this one, the composition is nice. I actually like the idea. I like the flowers together. You have 2, 4, 6, 8 flowers, which I think works very nicely. But it's the blur and the softness that makes it a little bit overwhelming, I think, the picture. So just something to think of. Again, the contrast of the colors work well. White is always good color for your main element, as it brings the attention immediately when the viewer look at it. So good things and things you could work on. Which brings us to post-processing. Nothing really I would add here. I think the color and white balance is very natural. All thing you could do maybe is to just jump in with a brush with a little bit of extra exposure and maybe just add a little bit of attention to your main subject. So something like this. And maybe what you could do is to add one more. Use linear gradient from the bottom, minus the exposure a little bit, and maybe do something like this. Which brings us to this one. Nothing really much I would add here as well. I think the vignette works very well. The flower, the colors are nice. All in all, very good. Evgeniy, just so this one, I would be looking to see how I can introduce softer light, different time of the day, sheet of paper, shadow, whatever you kind of think of. On this one, I would be looking at seeing how I can focus differently. If the f-stop higher will help to solve this, or finding little simpler compositions, maybe something I would be trying for the future. Anyway, thank you very much for sharing your images with us. It's always a pleasure to review them for you. You stay safe, take care, and send us more images in the future. Which brings us to John. John, anytime I see a cat and this young lady, I know it's you. That's a lovely black and white image, very creative. And when I saw it first, I really, really like it. Very, very good. You're always very creative with these things, and it's a pleasure to see it. This one, yeah, portraits of the animals, dogs, cats, and this certainly is a portrait. It's very, very lovely. Obviously, the dog going forward in a movement, that's never easy. I'm not sure about the softness with the green at the back, but we'll talk about it in a moment. Let's start by looking at the camera details. So this is Nikon D850. With the lens 24 to 70 millimeters, and from your camera settings, ISO 125, excellent, 45 millimeters, nice crop, making sure everything is very realistic, f2.8, so quick f-stop, and 1/640th of a second, creating this silhouette-like effect, which I think works very, very well. I'm very impressed. Excellent, technically very well done. Zooming in, the details are incredible. I mean, looking at the hair and everything. The cut is obviously a little bit softer, but the details on the model, just brilliant. Talking about this one, so 1/2000 of a second on the dog to be sharp like this. Very good. ISO 100, 200 millimeters, so different, same camera, different lens, 70 to 200 millimeters on this one. ISO 100, 200 millimeters punch in, f2.8, again, 1/2000 of a second. So very, very cool capture with the dog moving. Sharpness, good. I'm not sure about this part again, but I wonder, I quite like when the sharpness starts from here and then it slowly kind of go at the back. So I think that's good. The depth is very impressive. And that's about it technically. The light is a little bit on a harsher side, as you know yourself, but still good capture. Talking about composition, now as he is the main element and he has a little bit of space in front of him, I don't really mind that the active space in front of him is a little bit limited, but still, again, I'm crazy about the movement. I think that works really, really well here. The depth again works very well. The contrast of the colors work very, very well. The one thing I would have done, me personally, I would go in and I would actually remove the distraction of these straws. In Photoshop, or you could probably even do bits of it in Lightroom here. I wonder if we would just use the Shift key. Yeah, you could do something like this. And it would work quite well. Not greatest, but you could play around with it yourself. Other than that, very cool. Composition on this one. Now, coming back to my idea of parts which are not necessarily adding anything to the composition, I think the part which is all about is a little bit too small, so I would definitely crop in. Now we can stay with the same shape and same ratio you use, or we could use kind of cinematic crop like a 16:9. Let's do that. And we can center the model in the center of the image, so to do something like this, which I think it makes it a little bit more interesting. Or if we want to keep her like you had it, let's reset the edit and do the 16:9. We would just close the back a little bit and maybe do something like this, which again, I think makes it a little bit more interesting and it brings a little more impact into it. If we would have kept the same, let's just reset it. If we would have kept the same ratio you used and making sure that it's locked, then I would just basically do something this. I don't need that much of the black. I want her in the center and do something like this. So this is what I would do to it. Other than that, the view through, the fact that you can recognize some of the clouds, the light, the darker parts, just works. Very, very good. Very creative, John. Well done. On this one, so we are here, post-processing, we have done the cropping. Nothing really I would do differently here. You could bring maybe a little bit more glow by minusing the clarity, but it's just details. On this one, let's jump into your white balance and let's see the automatic. Now, temperature is good. I think it's warm enough. It doesn't need any cool, but I think the Lightroom is right by saying that you have a bit too much of a green, specifically on him. Now, when you see the before and after, that's when you can really see it. Maybe you don't need to push it that much. Maybe 20 would be enough. However, I think this is another example of when there is too much of a dominant color, like a green or blue, we get the color leaking into other parts of the image, which is the case here. And quite often, when we look at the image too long, we don't see it. It's when we kind of step back away for a while and come back to it, that's when you can see it. So I hope you can see the difference. And that's definitely something I would do. I would remove the straws just to remove the distraction and otherwise leave it. Great. John, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to see your images. I hope you're keeping well, staying safe. And if there is anything and you have more images, make sure you send them over to me. Moving on, the next photographer, Zdenek, all the way from Africa with the king of the prayer, king of animals, lion right here. And then this beautiful capture here, very interesting image. So let's jump to it. Starting with this one, very busy composition, very busy scene, mostly because of the light coming through. So that's one thing. Otherwise, beautiful image, beautiful animal. Obviously, he's been through few fights, as you can kind of look at him, but gorgeous, gorgeous portrait. And on this one, I have to say that I'm starting to understand your style a little bit. It's starting to really come together. And this is an image which you can totally print and put it on your wall, because it's an image which would always bring a conversation out. People would be wondering what it is and so on. And that's so important, I think, in today's end and age, to create images that open up a conversation and stop people and maybe have a little thought. So this is brilliant as well. Let's have a look at it, starting with this one and looking at the camera details. Back to your Nikon Coolpix, which we talked about a few weeks back. From your camera setting, ISO 100, 35.7 millimeters, f4.5, and 1/400 of a second. So camera settings are spot on. If anything, I would have wished that you could go with the f-stop even lower to really make all of this little blurrier. 1/400 of a second, we have all the details we need. ISO is good as well, so technically very well done. The capture is great, the space in front of it, the framing is brilliant. Coming to this one, obviously we are back to Canon M50 with your 15 to 45 millimeters lens, and on your camera setting, ISO 100, 39 millimeters, f10, 1/125th of a second. So very good here. Again, good settings. ISO, making sure that we have avoid any additional noise. F10, making sure that we have details all the way, which is a little artistic decision. I would have maybe go a little lower and just focus on the foreground, but whatever you think looks the best. And 1/125th of a second with some nice sky and a lovely light. Bringing us to the composition. The main element, the focal point is clear, is this right here. The contrast between the colors and the brightness, I think, works very well here as well. So in overall, very well done. On this one, I think composition is good. I would have wished the background would be a little bit softer. I think that would make the image a little bit more interesting, but other than that, it's good. Which brings us to post-processing. And probably this week, similar to last week, I would try to go for the black and white image here. I tell you why. Because the image is really busy. We have lots of texture on the tree and the grass. We have a lot of texture on him, and then we have lots of this light here. So there's lots happening, and human eyes would be really confused. One way to fix that without going through trying to remove these dark, like light parts, is to turn it to black and white. So we remove one of the overwhelming elements. So we could go into the black and white, which I think really makes it a little bit nicer. I think this is your before and after. And then you could really push it into your fine art portrait. So we could go into our selection, use the radial gradient, pointing at his face, adjust it a little bit, and then invert it, and then just minus the exposure. So we're really keeping just his face popping out. So I would do something like this. Now with the further, what do we want to do? Maybe something like this. We need to make it a little bit bigger. Yeah, and that's it from here. And then we can go into it with some brush, with some extra exposure, and just paint over the parts we want to be a little brighter. Something like this, maybe also something like this, and definitely on the top. And then one more brush with a minus exposure, where we're just gonna highlight some darker parts. Here, this part, and this part, and we could also darken the area around him and get something like this, which I really like. So let's have a look at it. Before and after. I mean, this you could totally print, and I don't mind the line that much. So that would be my suggestion and something I would try to do, Zdenek. Which brings us to this. Yeah, there is a little bit, I mean, what you could do to this. You could bring a little bit more vignette. You could definitely use little linear gradient from the bottom to close the image a little further. Where were we? We lost it for a moment. A linear gradient from the bottom to create something like this with a minus exposure, and equally we could add one more from top, and then add one more radial gradient this time, point it at the main subject, feather it, and then bring a little bit of exposure on it. And then that's about it. This is what I would do to it. Before, after, just a little bit more bringing attention on the subject and in the center. Zdenek, thank you so much. I hope you're staying safe. I hope you're all good. If you have more pictures, as always, make sure you send them for the next week's episode. Otherwise, stay safe, take care, and hopefully I'll see your images soon. That brings us to the last two photographers focusing on wildlife. First, we have Ken here with most incredible eagle capture, which I really love. And then this picture, which I'm really happy about, and I'll tell you why in a second. So let's start with this one. Talking about the eagle image, let's have a look at the camera details. This is Nikon Coolpix P1000 with the ISO 200, 1078 millimeters. I mean, how much is that? F8, and 1/640th of a second. Now, this image is all about the animal and all about the composition. I'm not worried too much about the fact that it's a little bit soft or anything like that. I think it's brilliant. Great capture. The eagle looking into the space, sitting on the tree, which really works well with the composition. All in all, brilliant capture. Very well done. Really love it. Great contrast as well. Altogether, very well done. And this image, why I really like it, is something what we talk about over and over on wildlife photography and also on some of your images from you. It's the contrast between the main subject. Quite often these animals, birds, are in their natural environment where they very much blend in with the background. Where in this case we have this great contrast. We have this black bird with a green background, bright background. We can fix the brightness a little bit in a moment, but I think the result is really, really cool. Looking at it, ISO 220, 324 millimeters. Again, lightly zoom in. f6.3, 1/500th of a second. The sharpness is good. The details are good. The details all the way through with the flower and the bird as well works very well in this case. Lovely blurred background, altogether excellent. Nice light as well, by the way. Bringing us to composition, which I think is great here. If I would go for something, I would probably go for square. Just probably crop it and get something like this. So I would have my bird on my third and got something like this out of it. And otherwise, I would leave it. I think it's really, really good. On this one, nothing I can add. I think the tree really helps us with the composition. Then the bird on one side, looking into the other side, great capture. Really, really like that. Which brings us to post-processing. Post-processing on this one, actually nothing I would do. If anything, I would bring a brush and maybe just do some dodge and burn. So I would just kind of brighten the bird itself. Something like this. And that's about it. If anything, maybe we can jump in and do a little stronger vignette around the image and leave it. On this one, I think what we need to do is to darken the background a little bit. And how to do this, we go into masking and we click on select subject, which should for us select the bird, which it did. Then we need to invert it, so that way we select everything other than the bird, and then we go in and minus the exposure just a little bit to get something like this. Let's see the before and after. And I think the difference between the two needs to be less contrasty, and when we minus the exposure a little bit, it gets a little bit darker, and I think it works and looks a little bit more natural. In a temperature, do we need to add maybe a little bit of tint? No. I think we leave it can because it's great. If anything, we add one more radial gradient on the bird itself and just bring the exposure up to bring some of the details out. Great two captures. Really happy about this one altogether. I think everything on it works. On this one, obviously, you would wish that it would be a little sharper, not in a way of, it's a little bit pixelated because it's such a zoom in. But as a picture altogether, it's great, Ken, and you should be really proud of it. Thank you so much for sending them over. I really hope that you're going to enjoy the review because it took some time this week, but next week we are back to normal. And then brings us to the last photographer of the week, Lieve. Lieve, the funniest picture I've seen for a while now. Absolutely love this one. Squirrel or chipmunk. Great idea, great composite, as I hope it is. And very well done together. The whole office laughed when I pull out this picture. So well done. Thank you very much for sending that over to us. Then we have this image right here with the lovely posture of the animal. I think that works really, really well. In my last 10 months of reviewing, you can't imagine how many pictures of squirrels and chipmunks I saw and how many of them just standing, doing nothing. And when you see the first few, you think it's cute. After that, you just hope for something a little bit more, which in this case is definitely the case. And here as well, he's washing himself or eating something, and that's just so much more than just the animal standing. Well, coming to the camera details, we will skip this one. We'll focus on that later. Let's talk about these two. Nikon D780 with your 100 to 400 millimeter lens. From camera settings, ISO 320, 400 millimeters, f6.3, 1/100th of a second on the shutter speed. Now, lovely image, well captured. Obviously, for the shutter speed, in order for the animal to be sharp, you need to stay this much. When you're on 400 millimeters, you can only go as low as f6.3, so that way you had to bring the ISO higher, which doesn't really matter. I think it's all good. There is a little bit of noise there, and you could run it through something like Topaz Denoise, but all in all, it's still a lovely capture. The only thing here I would say is the light, and you know, that's more visual thinking. I would have wished for you that the light was a little bit more diffused, so that way we would get less of the distraction from the different shadows and bright parts. Bringing us to this image, talking about technical part, it's the same camera, I believe, and same lens, but the different settings. ISO 200, 300 millimeters, f6, 1/160th of a second. So ISO spot on, 200 is very good, 300 millimeters punched in, f6 giving us nice blur at the back, which I think works, and 1/160th of a second, making sure that everything is nice and sharp. So well done. Now, framing wise, the only thing I wish is that you would have a little bit more space at the bottom here, so the tail wouldn't be touching your edge, but other than that, that would be it. The light is very nice here, very nice and diffused, working excellent. Bringing us to composition, I already mentioned the part here where I would wish that we would have more of the bottom, less of the top. Other than that, I think the center attention works very well here. On this one, composition goes, I think it's a shame with the contrast of the colors. Obviously, the animal having the same color as a background makes it a little bit melting together. I would also just maybe turn it around a little bit to have it straight, even more so, and get something like this, as it makes it a little bit more balanced altogether. If he's in the center, it's nice to have him here straight and direct. Which brings us to post-processing. So on this image, with that much happening, again, a little bit similar to Zdenek, I would go for the black and white edit, and then use my radial gradient, point it at the animal, and invert it, and then minus the exposure. So that way we bring in the attention to the center of the image, on the animal itself, and making it all a little bit more interesting. Then we can jump in with a brush with some extra exposure, and we can paint a little bit more on the animal, so it's even more visible. After that, if we want to really push it, we can use linear gradient from the side with some minus value, do the same from the other side, and get something like this. Let's see, before and after. I think it makes it very, very nice. If you would want to go even further when it comes to removing the distraction, I would probably crop it to like square crop. So that way we get just the animal, and I think it's really powerful. So very, very good. This is what I would do to it, leave to make it a little bit stand out. On this one, actually nothing I would add. I think it works very, very well. Again, similarly, you could crop some of the top if you would want to, probably even without losing that much. Really bringing the focus on the animal, and that's about it. Lieve, thank you so much for sharing your images. Thank you for sharing the first one, which is brilliant. It's a lovely composite. Mixing these things together, I think it looks very, very good. And most importantly, it really had us talking, had us have a good laugh, which is the most important thing when it comes to images. So again, if you have more images, send them to us. You stay safe. Take care, and bye-bye. And the same goes for all of you folks. If you want to join us for the next episode of our photography review show, all you need to do is to jump to our website, cleverphotographer.com, and look for the membership there, Clever Photographer Plus, which comes with the great themed bundle of tools for photographers every month, as well as access to our Clever Photographer Academy and the photography review show. Folks, thank you very much. Stay safe. Thank you for watching today. My name was Jakub, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.